Come on now, give me the ball.
Are you a fan of the Alien franchise? Honestly speaking, who isn't? Well, speaking of the film franchise, Sigourney Weaver's character Ellen Ripley effectively established a cemented position for herself for years to come. First as one of the most seasoned individuals to have made it through several horrifying encounters with the xenomorphs, and then as the fiercely fearsome alien-human hybrid Ripley 8. This of course brings us to the main contents of today's video, where we'll be delving into the origins of Ripley 8, or in other words, the 8th and the only successful clone of Ellen Ripley. Mind you, we're also going to take a look at the failed clones of Ripley, so we suggest you stay tuned till the end of this video. Yeah, are you ready? But before we get into our explanation, we do have one very small request. If you enjoy our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Ellen Ripley? Before we start exploring the origins of Ripley 8, it's imperative that we talk a little bit about Ellen Ripley. To begin with, Ellen Ripley honestly needs no introduction, and her character evolution is nothing short of remarkable. While initially, as seen in the movies, Ellen is introduced as a warrant officer on board the commercial space tug Nostromo, her levels of determination, intelligence, and dare we disregard their leadership skills are seen shining through as the story unfolds. Ellen was the only survivor of the xenomorph's deadly ambush on board the Nostromo, thereby setting up the next stage for a battle to remember between the humans and the xenomorphs. Of course, it goes without saying that throughout the franchise, Ellen faced unimaginable threats and challenges while fighting for her life against the highly aggressive and deadly extraterrestrial species, and it's fitting to state that she put up quite the fight before resorting to a sacrificial suicide in the hopes of eliminating the xenomorph menace for good. Now, when it comes to Ellen's character, she personifies feminine strength, especially in terms of proving herself in an environment that's dominated by males. Her defensive guard is on full display regarding Newt in particular, as well as those around her in general. Also, in spite of having faced interminable, unthinkable horrors, she continued to fight until her last breath and gave her very best.
Who are you?
Ripley Ellen, Lieutenant First Class.
Who made the clone of Ellen Ripley 8? Following Ellen Ripley's sacrificial suicide to exterminate the last known xenomorph specimen to exist, or in other words, the embryonic alien queen developing inside her, all hopes of creating the xenomorphs and turning them into biological weapons were lost. At least, that's how it seemed. But then again, that was obviously not the case. Apparently, blood samples were collected by Jonathan Clemens, the chief medical officer at the maximum security prison on Fiorino 161 when Ellen had crash-landed on the barren planet. Weyland-Yutani Corporation gained possession of the blood samples when the penal facility was shut down. Eventually, the samples were passed on to the United Systems military in the year 2356, after Weyland-Yutani formally unfolded. Now, given the fact that the xenomorph had the ability to share DNA with its host, Ellen's sample also had the DNA of the xenomorph embryo that she'd been carrying when her blood samples were taken. Over the next 25 years, the United Systems military science department made significant developments in cloning technology, and it goes without saying that the military arm of the United Systems started creating a clone of Ellen Ripley, resorting to her blood samples in their possession in the hopes of gaining access to the alien queen inside her. Of course, it didn't take the science team, which was headed by Dr. Mason Wren, much time to figure out that it was both tricky and complicated to detach the DNA of the two species in the blood samples during the cloning procedure. It was due to the xenomorph's ability to subsume elements of its host's DNA right at the embryonic stage, thereby metamorphosing its own physical composition in the process. While the original plan was to clone the xenomorph queen back to life from the samples, and very quickly proved to be an unfeasible task. In fact, attempts at trying to clone Ellen Ripley and the alien queen jointly led to genetic crossing, which in turn resulted in failed Ripley clones that were horrifically malformed creatures at the end of the day. Nonetheless, after 7 failed attempts, and add to this incessant enhancements to the process, the 7-man scientific team was finally successful in creating the perfect clone of the long-deceased Ellen Ripley, or in other words, Ripley 8. As the name suggests, she was the 8th attempt and the only successful clone of Ellen Ripley. Also, the covert USM project took about 10 years to reach execution aboard USM Auriga, the medical research space vessel of the United Systems military, and the scientists surgically extracted the alien queen chestburster before it could emerge. Ripley 8, Alien Resurrection POV. For a better understanding of the character, let's try analyzing Ripley 8's character from the movie's perspective. Truth be told, Ripley 8 was just a medium to acquire the alien queen. Her primary purpose was to serve as a host for the alien queen and ensure the survival of the extraterrestrial xenomorph species. Of course, this was established right at the very beginning of the film. General Martin Perez, who wasn't only the commanding officer of the USM Auriga, but also oversaw the scientific team that was led by Dr. Wren, wasn't too keen on keeping Ripley 8 alive after the clone queen Queen was surgically removed from her body. However, it was Dr. Wren's decision to keep her alive to study her in the future, and this naturally had Perez and Wren at odds with each other. As we move ahead with the film's storyline, we find Ripley 8 subjected to tests of all kinds that gave Dr. Wren and his team several opportunities to delve into her physical as well as mental state. It quickly became noticeably evident that Ripley 8, despite looking like a human, was not really a human. With that being said, she wasn't an alien either, but the remaining xenomorph DNA inside her made her a hybrid. Ripley 8 even inherited the memories and intellect of the original Ellen Ripley, and throughout her development, her origin and purpose were deliberately kept in the dark from her. Of course, that didn't really stop her from developing a psychic connection with the alien Queen. She was well aware of the fact that the Queen was extracted from her and was being bred on board the Auriga. When the xenomorph outbreak took place on board the Auriga, especially with the clone xenomorphs escaping from their containment cells, Ripley 8 joined forces with a cadre of survivors from the resupply starship Betty to escape from Auriga. On the way to Betty, Ripley chanced upon a laboratory door with 1-7 written on it. With Ripley 8 looking at the number 8 tattooed on her arm, she decided to venture inside. To her horror, Ripley 8 came across all the failed clones, or horrifically deformed creatures in this case, that had been created before her, with her discovering Ripley 7 still alive and begging to be killed. Given the fact that she was in extreme amounts of pain and was clearly not in a state to do so herself, a horrified Ripley 8 acted in accordance with Ripley 7's request and ended up setting the whole laboratory on fire, resorting to a Draco double burner. Ripley 8 was eventually captured by the lead alien and taken to the Queen's chamber, nestled in the waste tank at the bottom of the Auriga. This was where she witnessed the alien Queen possessing an enormous womb in the place of its ovipositor and giving birth to the newborn, which, mind you, also happened to be the very result of the genetic mixing. Right after being born, the newborn killed the Queen and chose Ripley 8 as its mother, while Ripley 8 escaped at the first chance she got and made her way to Betty. Unbeknownst to her, the newborn also followed her and made it inside the ship right before it departed. Ripley 8 was forced to confront it in the vessel's cargo hold when she found it about to kill the Auton Annalie Call. Taking advantage of the newborn's visible affection for her, Ripley 8 distracted the creature and used her acidic blood to burn a hole in the viewing window of the ship. The subsequent decompression violently ejected the newborn into space through the small aperture, thereby killing it. The Betty eventually made it to Earth, and Ripley 8 was in complete awe of the view from the ship. When Call asked Ripley 8 what they should do next, Ripley 8 told her that she had no idea because she was a stranger there herself. What happened to Ripley 8 after the movie? Of course, the story of Ripley 8 doesn't end with Jean-Pierre Jeunet's alien resurrection. It goes without saying that there's more to her story, and this brings us to Michael Jan Friedman's 2005 novel titled Aliens: Original Sin, which serves as a sequel to the movie and was published by DH Press. The novel brings back Ripley 8 as the new captain of the resupply ship Betty, along with characters Dom Vries, Ron Jonah, and the android Annalie Call from the movie. From raising entirely new questions to answering unanswered ones from the movie, the narrative of the novel has Ripley 8 and her crew unraveling a deadly conspiracy, and no points for guessing that they also managed to get entangled in another alien outbreak, one that takes place on a giant botanical space station this time. Well, without further delay, let's get on to exploring the storyline of Original Sin. The novel begins with a bar fight, in which Betty crew members Vries, Jonah, and Crack fight up against a cluster of cargo haulers inside a pub on the deep space border terminal known as the Byzantium Station. The fight spreads like wildfire, and in no time, everybody inside is literally engaged in a scuffle with one another. The brawl automatically gains the attention of the station security and draws the guards there. This has Ripley 8 and Call in turn managing to lay their hands on a secure data core somewhere else on the station. After Call is able to link herself with the mainframe and obtain the confidential information they were after in the first place, Ripley 8 simply orders the remaining crew members to return to Betty. However, Vries inadvertently makes himself conspicuous to a bunch of security guards while attempting to slip away from there, and the guards go after him and the rest. Well, it goes without saying that the Betty crew literally has to fight their way back to the ship, but while doing so, they're spotted by a reporter named Simone, who, after identifying Ripley amongst others, decides to stow away on board Betty in the hopes of laying his hands on an exciting story. As for Betty's new pilot, Bolero, she simply fakes her way out of the station's docking bay after having threatened to blow up the bay doors. Somewhere else on the sprawling, orbital multi-dome botanical colony, Domes Epsilon, the crew gears up to take the delivery of a routine supply tube. With one of the station's crew members about to unload the pod, he encounters a leathery egg-like capsule, which instantly hurls a facehugger that ends up overpowering him. Security officer Officer Shepard later finds the crew member and takes him to the medical center. Back on board Betty, Simone is also discovered in due course and is almost on the verge of being ejected into space, but with Ripley 8 learning that he's a journalist, she lets him accompany them on their mission. A while later, an unidentified vessel approaches Betty and docks with the ship, after which the vessel sends up a horde of masked and heavily armed men. While the crew of Betty is successful in overcoming the men, they're shocked to find the men have committed suicide so as to avoid questioning. Also, the crew of Betty manages to flee from the enemy vessel by a hair's breadth before it self-destructs. Of course, Simone is shocked by the entire course of events, and that's when Ripley 8 decides to fill him in with details regarding what's really happening. So, it was after the USM Auriga incident that Cole came to know about a covert shadow organization known as Loki. Now, this top-secret government group has not only been communicating, but also trading with an ancient extraterrestrial species known as the Malakak for over many centuries. You'll be surprised to learn that it was Malakak's derelict that the commercial space tug Nostromo stumbled upon on LV-426 several hundreds of years ago. Loki engaged in a barter system with the Malakak, orchestrating xenomorph outbreaks at distant isolated colonies for the Malakak so that they could harvest those aliens for their own purpose in exchange for access to the Malakak's advanced alien technology. Ever since Ripley 8 and her crew learnt of such sinister activities, they took it upon themselves to thwart their plans. The ambush from the unidentified vessel earlier, which no points for guessing, was caused by Loki's forces. During the Betty crew's recent raid on Byzantium Station, they discovered that another outbreak had been organized on Domes Epsilon, and hence the crew was on their way to rescue the inhabitants. With Ripley 8 requesting Simone to cover the conspiracy and disclose things to the public, Simone instantly agrees to do so, well aware that he's about to hit the jackpot with this new piece of information. Upon traveling to Domes Epsilon, Ripley 8 and her crew discover to their horror that the impregnated crew member has already been slaughtered by the chestburster that grew within him. That's not all. The docking bay was also destroyed, and with Bolero unable to communicate with the station, she's forced to make Betty land on the hull instead. With Ripley 8, Cole, Jonah, and Crack making their way inside the station, they encounter the surviving crew members, who suggest a backup supply bay to escape from the station. While looking around the bay, the group chances upon a xenomorph, and with Ripley 8 and Jonah killing it, they think they've managed to secure the threat. But to their complete horror, they soon discover that the xenomorph they obliterated a while back isn't the only one in the station, and that there are hordes of them. In fact, these xenomorphs are also subtly different in terms of their biology, or in simpler words, they're different than the ones Ripley 8 had encountered and fought before. Clearly outnumbered, most make a run for the supply bay. However, they're attacked by the hideous slavering killers, and the group gets scattered. In the ensuing chaos, many of the scientists are either killed or taken to be impregnated by the xenomorphs. In the meantime, while seeking more content for his story, Simone also enters the station, and while he encounters the xenomorphs, he manages to find his way to Ripley 8 and a few survivors. Sadly, he runs out of luck while attempting to save Ripley 8 from a xenomorph and dies a horrible death. With the remaining survivors making their way back to Betty, one of the space station's crew members, Cody, attempts to take possession of the ship, but Vries, who was already on board Betty, shoots Cody, and the latter is revealed to be an android. This has Ripley 8 and Cole cross-questioning the damaged synthetic and learning that Loki employed him, and he was essentially placed aboard the station to track the outbreak and make sure that it goes as per plan. Cody also discloses to the group that the xenomorphs on the station are a new strain, particularly contrived by the Malakak, and that they're capable of birthing close to a dozen creatures from just a single host. Before Cody can disclose more information, an inbuilt destruct programming erases his memory. Of course, the Betty manages to leave from Domes Epsilon, demolishing the station with as many bombs the crew had left behind. Angie, who happens to be the only surviving member of the incident, asks to join the Betty crew in their fight against Loki, given that she'd lost not only her home, but also all of her colleagues in the process. Ripley 8 welcomes her into the team, knowing that she and her crew will be in dire need of all the aid that's there, especially when Loki comes after them for foiling their deal with the Malakak. Can Ripley 8 survive a battle with Predator and Terminator? Well, we're about to find that out. Of course, this brings us to the 4-issue limited crossover comic book series Aliens vs. Predator vs. the Terminator, published by Dark Horse Comics. The comic series was penned by Mark Schultz, penciled by Mel Ruby, and inked by Christopher Ivey. Mind you, a lot is happening here, so our primary focus will be on the character of Ripley 8. We suggest you fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to be one hell of a bumpy ride. Issue 1. Dealing with the Unknown. The first chapter begins with a bunch of people inside what appears to be some kind of a sewer-residing community, looking for someone in particular. The group seeks out who they're looking for, and it turns out to be a woman clad in a hooded attire. With a woman in the group addressing the hooded person as Ellen Ripley, the latter asks them to give her a hand and help her stand up. As one of the men offers to help her, she attacks him and then starts beating the shit out of the rest of them. This is when the woman, who had previously identified her as Ellen Ripley, tells her they are not her enemies, and that she is Annalee Call. Now, for those of you who are new to the Ellen Ripley storyline, Call was the android Ripley 8 encountered in the movie Alien Resurrection. Call suggests to Ripley 8 that they all go somewhere safe where they can talk and take her to her operations base. There, she conveys her sadness at the fact that Ripley 8 just disappeared post the events of Alien Resurrection. Call was pretty sure that she and Ripley 8 would stick by each other and help one another get through life on Earth together, to which Ripley 8 tells her that Call didn't need her, as she seemed to have done just fine on her own. In due course, Call fills in Ripley 8 with the sketchiest details regarding a Circle 7 bioengineering project on the military science station Typhoon. Call is sure that a man named Trollenberg is leading a team there to develop a hybrid super soldier that involves the harvested DNA of a xenomorph. As we move on with the story, we find Dr. Trollenberg busy with his secret project, or in other words, on his super soldier. When he's informed by his subordinate that General Helm has come to visit him, he states that he'll handle the situation. We soon learn that General Helm is not only the commander of the Typhoon station, but also happens to be the military head of the whole project. And judging by his conversation with Dr. Trollenberg, it becomes pretty evident that he wishes to shut down the project, given that Dr. Trollenberg dangerously veered far from their approved game plan. Additionally, with Dr. Trollenberg commissioning cybernetic components from unauthorized sources, General Helm is extremely furious at him. However, this only triggers Dr. Trollenberg, who ends up opening fire at the General's two guards. With General Helm shooting at Dr. Trollenberg as a counterattack, he realizes that Dr. Trollenberg is no human. And after Dr. Trollenberg is done killing the General, he alters his voice to impersonate the deceased General and informs everyone that the General will be in the lab with him till the completion of the project. After this, Dr. Trollenberg dumps the bodies of the General and his guards into a massive container of acid. Coming back to Call and Ripley 8, Call tries her best to have Ripley 8 on board with the team. She tells her that her team has managed to gain access to the Typhoon by posing themselves as a food catering auxiliary service, and that they need Ripley 8 because the entire thing involves alien genetic sampling, or in simple words, the same cloning technology that resurrected Ripley 8 as a hybrid with extra human strength and functioning. This is precisely when Ripley 8 mentions to Call that she doesn't fear the aliens anymore, that she's stopped dreaming about them, and that she's made peace with the fact that these creatures can't be stopped. In Ripley 8's words, the aliens are coming and the human race is gonna suffer. When Ripley 8 adamantly tells Call that she's not willing to risk the little amount of peace that she's finally found, Call is left with no other options but to blackmail Ripley 8 by telling her that if she doesn't come aboard, she'll pass on her location to the military. In short, Ripley 8 unwittingly makes herself a part of the mission. Mind you, it's also around the same time that we find a predator traveling toward the Typhoon, and no points for guessing that the intergalactic super hunter has its own plans of hunting the super soldier. Posing as the world's most unexceptional food delivery service, Call, Ripley 8 and the crew make their way inside the station, and after effortlessly taking down the guards, they enter Dr. Trollenberg's laboratory. A brief fight ensues, with Call and her crew unable to make out why their bullets have no effect on Dr. Trollenberg. Ripley 8 informs them that they're dealing with an android. Dr. Trollenberg almost gains an advantage on Ripley 8, but before he can act on it, the cloaked predator decapitates him. While this obviously leaves everyone shocked for a while, the predator, now decloaked, is hurled back into the room, after which it's seen engaged in a fight with the mammoth super soldier. Issue 2, Monster vs. Machine. The second chapter begins with an intense fight between the Predator and the Super Soldier. As Ripley 8, Call and the crew witness the brutal barbaric fight, they realize that the Super Soldier is resistant to every possible attack of the Predator. To add to things, the Super Soldier, who basically happens to be an alien-android hybrid, also displays the power to adapt to battle conditions. The Super Soldier is able to rip off the arm of the Predator in no time, after which he absorbs the exterior bulkhead of the lab and opens a hole in the vacuum. After the Super Soldier tosses out the Predator, Ripley 8 and the rest make their way back toward their space freighter seconds before the whole space station blows up. On the other hand, the Super Soldier is seen boarding an escape pod, carrying some alien chestbursters with him. Despite witnessing the space station explode, Ripley 8 is pretty convinced that the alien-android hybrid didn't die. This has Call taking out Dr. Trollenberg's skull, which she'd picked up earlier from the station, and suggesting that she hacks into the memory cache in order to gain more information. Meanwhile, in the escape pod, the Super Soldier is seen beginning work on a second Super Soldier, who, by the looks of it, seems to be almost ready. Anyway, with Call gaining entry inside Dr. Trollenberg's skull, she chances upon an interactive recording of John Connor. Connor elucidates the Skynet War and the Skynet Resurrection program, further explaining how the program came up with crypto Terminators, who had power to exist in civilization indefinitely. It's through Connor's recording that the creation of the Super Soldier is shown, along with the fact that Dr. Trollenberg was also categorically a crypto Terminator. The recording further stresses that Skynet must be terminated at all costs, because the new generation of Terminators created created are bound to wield unimaginable powers and are capable of anything. After Cole logs out of Dr. Trollenberg's memories, a conversation with Ripley 8 and the crew is cut short by the unexpected arrival of 3 Predator ships that are seen engulfing the freighter from all sides. After teleporting themselves on board the Carthage, the Predators grab hold of Ripley 8 and disappear along with her from there, much to the shock of Cole and the crew. Elsewhere, the escape pod is seen landing at its destination, and 2 super soldiers are seen getting out of it. Issue 3, The Uneasy Alliance. The 3rd chapter begins with Cole and the crew lamenting over the fact that Ripley 8 disappeared into thin air right before their eyes. While thinking of the real reason behind Ripley 8's abrupt abduction, Cole surmises that the Predators took Ripley 8 for the same reason she and her crew wanted her in the first place, Ripley 8's psychic connection with the aliens. Cole further concludes that the Predators are well aware of Ripley 8's genetic heritage, and that there's a high possibility that the feral hunters want Ripley 8 by their side in their battle against the super soldiers, which is something that even Cole and her crew want at the end of the day. Well, it's only fitting to state that Cole decides to turn the whole situation to her advantage. Meanwhile, on board the Predator ship, Ripley 8 wanders around and simultaneously blames her bad luck. Realizing that the Predators don't consider her a threat, she starts pondering over why the Predators abducted her in the first place. This is when she recalls that the Predators had cut her earlier to see her bleed, and upon inspecting her acidic blood, they knew what they were dealing with. With Ripley 8 discovering a trophy room packed with xenomorph relics, she eventually learns about the intergalactic hunter's connection to the aliens. Anyway, Ripley 8 is ultimately taken to a round operating table and tied down, after which some kind of a breathing device is attached to her face. With Ripley 8 finding one of the Predators holding a sharp needle-like drill, she's sure that she'll be made a part of terrifying experiments the same way the military laboratories did. The following comic panel brings the readers to the Navy heavy cruiser Euphrates, or in other words, the destination that the prototype super soldier had earlier reached. The ship's commanding officer doesn't trust the super soldiers. Moreover, with them requesting to be transferred to a high-security asteroid facility, the commanding officer is even more skeptical about them. After the arrival of a subspace message, the super soldiers are denied access to the black asteroid. Of course, this doesn't sit well with them, and they're seen slaughtering the crew. Next, with the prototype super soldier beginning to absorb parts of the cruiser's interior, the ship is literally left in ruins. Back on the Carthage, Cole is optimistic that the Predators would, in all likelihood, be following the very route taken by the super soldiers toward the closest stockpile of aliens, or in other words, the black asteroid. As for Ripley 8, she awakens from a dream and observes a surgical scar on her neck. The Predators take her in front of a viewing screen where she gets a good view of the black asteroid, and it finally dawns upon her that the Predators have extracted the information out of her genetic memory, which Ripley 8 received as a result of her cross DNA. The 3rd chapter ends with the super soldiers beginning their own successful assault and taking over the black asteroid, while the Predators are seen making Ripley 8 a part of a pre-battle ritual, applying ceremonial war paint on her and equipping her with weapons, thereby giving her the honorable chance of fighting and dying alongside them. Issue 4, Future Hell. The 4th and final chapter begins with almost half the Navy arriving and surrounding the black asteroid from all sides, hoping to take back control of the station. However, before they can do that, the entire fleet of military ships is wiped out by what seems to be a highly powerful energy surge. Cole and her crew watch the whole thing in horror, and upon realizing that the black asteroid is temporarily drained of all external power, they decide to take their chance and slip unnoticed into a docking bay. As for Ripley 8 and the Predators, they, upon gaining access to the station, discover that the 2 super soldiers have created more monstrous-looking blue-skinned super soldiers. It goes without saying that the Predators proved no match for the super soldiers. The ambush was as ineffective as the attack on Typhoon, primarily due to the super soldiers' incredible ability to absorb huge amounts of energy. Believe us when we tell you that the invincible lot is even capable of rendering the Predators' self-destruct weapons useless. Call it an act of desperation or sheer luck, Ripley 8 ends up releasing the full-grown aliens from their containment cells, and no points for guessing that the Hounds of Hell are able to turn the tables within a split second. The acid blood of the xenomorphs makes the super soldiers vulnerable, damaging them to extreme levels. As for the remaining Predators, they make full use of this advantage to open fire without the slightest bit of hesitation before falling prey to the unforgiving xenomorphs themselves. Ripley 8 eventually runs into Cole and one of her crew members and tells them that they need to leave the station right away before everything explodes. Of course, Cole isn't too keen on leaving Ripley 8 behind, but with the latter insisting that she has a final job to take care of, Cole and the crew member leave from there. By now, it should be clear to you that Ripley 8's final task is to hunt down the prototype super soldier that she'd spotted just a while back. There's just no way that she's going to let the Alpha hybrid flee from there, and in turn allow him to keep the dream of a Skynet empire alive. So it's fitting to state that she goes after him. While Cole is seen forcibly leaving the station just seconds before it's destroyed, Ripley 8 also finds her way to the Alpha hybrid's escape pod and makes it out of there. Ripley 8 is seen stealthily walking toward the Alpha hybrid and making a move to hit him in the eye with a knife, but the latter's super reflex response allows him to evade her ambush. But then again, that was plan A, and Ripley 8 decides to go with Plan B. She purposely cuts her arm using the knife, and as a result, her alien acidic blood ends up melting the controls, eating into the reactors and through the very hull. This causes a massive explosion, and the final chapter ends with Cole stating to her crew that she hoped Ripley 8 made her peace and got her dignity and soul back, having saved mankind's soul in turn. Personality and powers of Ripley 8. First things first, Ripley 8's personality was diversely different from the original Ellen Ripley. We're looking at someone who was hardly ever unnerved by the situations she occasionally encountered. To begin with, she was highly sarcastic, and her epic dialogue from the movie Alien Resurrection proves so. It didn't really matter to her if she was subjected to some test or she was in captivity. Ripley 8 hardly showed any pangs of emotion. With that being said, she did show us what's fitting to address as a real response on two particular occasions. While the first has to be her being horrified and highly distressed to find her failed clones, the second was the genuine level of fear during her first encounter with the newborn. Now, in speaking of her powers, her hybrid characteristics made her look like a human, but then again, she was neither human nor alien, but more like something in between. As a hybrid, she could jump incredible distances, exert herself for hours, and not show the slightest bit of exhaustion. Add to this her ability to hold her breath underwater, superior physical durability, superior intellect and cognitive skills, taking heavy weights to her face and withstanding powerful electrical charges that can actually take down a rhino for that matter. The fact that she had inhuman strength showed when she could actually tear off a facehugger after it latched to her face. Now, this is something that even a predator or an engineer is incapable of. Next, there's her rapid cell regeneration ability, followed by the acidic blood, and while the latter is far less potent as compared to that of the aliens, it'll do the job just fine. Other failed clones of Ripley. The failed clones of Ripley were basically the result of the USM and Dr. Wren's experiments to resurrect the alien species and then use them as biological weapons. Created on board the Auriga, each of the failed clones was a horrifically deformed creature containing features of both Ellen Ripley and the xenomorph. In total, 7 failed clones were created before the success of Ripley 8. While the first 6 clones died at an indeterminate time after their creation, Ripley 7 somehow reached maturity before having her life ended by Ripley 8. The first 6 clones of Ripley were complete failures, but with every attempt, the USM scientists did make refinements to their cloning procedure, thereby developing more biologically viable beings, and also moving one step closer to their ultimate goal of getting access to an infant xenomorph queen in the process. Also, judging by the physical appearance of the initial 6 clones, there were tiny improvements with every attempt. Ripley 1 was horribly malformed and died while she was in her infant stage. Ripley 3 survived to what looked like the equivalent age of 2 years, and Ripley 4 to 4 years. While the later clones were not really human-like in appearance, they were biologically more stable. The first 6 clones were stored inside tanks filled with some kind of a preservative liquid, so as to study them and keep track of how far the scientists had come in terms of progress. Now, let's talk about Ripley 7. She was the only failed clone that was kept alive on board the Auriga. In terms of appearance, she closely resembled Ellen Ripley, but her body was bloated and deformed. Also, the fact that she'd undergone surgery was clearly visible, but whether anything viable was recovered happens to be highly unlikely. When Ripley 7 was discovered by Ripley 8, she was in an extreme amount of physical pain. There's also a possibility that she had difficulty talking because she could only utter disjointed words, and that too with immense difficulty. It was at her insistence that Ripley 8 ended up killing her and torching the whole laboratory using the USM Draco double burner.
Oh, look.
Marvelous verdict. Well, with this, we finally come to the end of our video here. So, what are your thoughts on Ripley 8 and her superhuman abilities? Also, how did you find the comics? Have you read the 4-issue limited crossover comic book series? We'd like to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Please do leave a thumbs up and stay tuned with us, as we promise to come back with more exciting content. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching. Have a nice one.